The first buyout period for the NHL this year is almost upon us on July the 1st. So today we're going to take a look at the top candidates amongst NHL teams who could be buyout candidates this offseason. We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're taking a look at the most likely candidates who could be facing a potential buyout of their NHL contract. The first buyout window opens soon on July the 1st, so I wanted to take a look at who I thought were going to be the most likely candidates we could see this happen to. Now, a couple of players you're not going to find on my list today, but you may have seen on other people's list. I will discuss those quickly. I guess we could kind of call them honorable mentions, but players that I think, teams should consider, but I think they just won't do it based on cost. Like, for example, Marc-Edouard Vlasic in San Jose. I know is a common name you see brought up for this, but he still has 4 years left at $7 million per year. The Sharks would be tied to that contract for 8 years since it's, two-thirds buyout at twice the amount of time. So clearly, that's not something the Sharks want to have attached to them. And Nick Foligno in Boston is another one. 1 year at 3.8. They may consider it, but I'm not really sure they need to do that based on what we've heard from the team. I don't suspect they're going down that road. There's Jason Zucker in Pittsburgh, has 1 year left at 5.5. Another player that, I think there's justification there to an extent. I'm just not sure they're going to go down that road. I think that, really, they could either trade Zucker with a little bit of salary retained, or maybe do some other things here to kind of get, their cap situation in better order. But overall, I don't expect those players to be bought out, but there's certainly guys that could be considered. And like I said, they're kind of like honorable mentions. You're not going to find on my list here today. But the other guys you will find on my list today, let's start with Toronto Maple Leaf goaltender Petr Mrazek. Now, he's got 2 years left at $3.8 million. It's a 3-year deal, so it was only a year into it. Ultimately, the Maple Leafs might be able to trade their way out of this rather than do a buyout. They may have to attach a sweetener, though. It might be maybe a second-round pick, prospect. Hard to say exactly what they're going to have to add here to entice teams to take that on. I do see Chicago being a very likely landing spot if they do work out a trade. But if they don't and they can't get it figured out, they need that space. They would save $2.7 million in year one, $2.9 million in year two, but they would have 2 additional years added on at $1.4 million. But considering that's 3 and 4 years down the road, respectively, I think Dubas and the Leafs would be not too worried about that right now, hoping the cap goes up enough that it's not really a problem. They could enjoy the $2.7 and $2.9 million savings over this coming year and the next year. So that is an option for them if they can't get a trade. But I think a trade is more likely in this scenario. The Nashville Predators defenseman Philip Myers is another one. 1 year left at 2.55. It is a backloaded deal where he's actually making $3.8 million in cash. A buyout could actually create some space. He's 25 years old, still an RFA, so it's a less expensive buyout. So next year, they could actually get a cap credit of $616,000, followed by a cap hit of $634,000 the next year. Now, this contract actually creates value because of that potential, so we may not even see Nashville do the buyout. I wouldn't be shocked if Nashville was able to trade Myers and another team buys him out knowing this. I mean, they might not get much in return, but it gets the deal fully off their books and maybe gets something really small in return, for example. But if a team that's really desperate for cap space could essentially take this contract on and buy it out and gain space, they get a credit instead of a hit. So that does have value, and Poyle and the Predators might take advantage to get some small asset out of it in return. With Chicago, you have Tyler Johnson, 2 years left at $5 million apiece. Tyler Johnson went through neck surgery, similar to Jack Eichel this past year, was able to return. I'm not really sure his contract's tradable at that kind of money, even with retained salary. Of course, he was with the Lightning for a long time, ended up going to Chicago. They basically had to, move him along. But I don't know that this is going to really be something that the Hawks can get out from underneath without doing a buyout. They would actually save a full $3 million in cash savings. I don't think they're too worried about their cap situation. They would more be about opening up a roster spot here to have another maybe younger prospect get a chance to get some more ice time. The New York Rangers and defenseman Patrick Nemeth is another good candidate, I feel. He has 2 years and $2.5 million on his contract. Certainly wasn't real high up there in Gerard Gallant's list of defensemen to play in the playoffs. They have lots of other young guys still coming that are looking for more room, like Lundqvist and Jones and Braden Schneider is getting more and more of a role. So to me, I think Nemeth is somebody they can do without. They would have obviously him on the books for 4 years instead of 2, given the fact that the 2/3 buyout at twice the period of time. They would save $1.5 million in next year's cap, which is vitally important to keep some of their key pieces around that need contracts. Of course, they'd have charges of $1 million, and then a 0 hit for the year 2, then 2 additional years at $1 million. So to me, it's not a given that this happens. They could even consider burying him in the minors, where they'd get a little over $1 million relief. But, either way, that extra $500,000 next year might be important. So don't know for sure it'll happen, but I could see the Rangers at least considering this. The Vancouver Canucks and Jason Dickinson, another one I expect to possibly see. And that is, of course, if they can't find a trade, I would think that these teams are going to try to trade these players first and foremost up front, even with a little bit of retained salary before they go the buyout route. But ultimately, this is a fallback option if all else fails to create the space. Jason Dickinson has a contract left of 2 years at $2.65 million per year. They would have cap hits of $942, $391, $992, and $992. So ultimately, that gets them to go from $265 down to $942 this coming year. It saves them over $1.5 million. So to me, that is something that I think Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin will definitely consider. We know that JR has gone on a lot about wanting cap flexibility, big time. Dickinson only put up 11 points in 62 games this past year. Wasn't really a great fit there, and I think that's something that we'll seriously see them consider. Edmonton Oilers forward Zack Kassian is another one. Zack Kassian has 2 years left at $3.2 million. Definitely replaceable for what he provides, in my opinion. They'd have cap hits of $667,000 next year, followed by $1.87 in year 2. Then 2 years of $967,000. So they'd go from 3.2 to $667. So that's a pretty big savings, just over $2.5 million next year. And the Oilers are tight, so that could come very much in handy. The hit in year 2 would hurt a little bit, but it's still a savings as to what he's being paid now. Then the additional years, like I said, by then you're hoping the cap's gone up a little bit more, and it's not such a big deal. But he's definitely expendable. You have players who can replace him at a cheaper value, I think. And the Oilers need every dollar they can get in the cap. So to me, it's something you're going to see them consider. Next up, we got Montreal Canadiens forward Jonathan Drouin, 1 year at $5.5. I really think he needs to move on from Montreal to get his career back on track. Now, the Montreal Canadiens, like I said about all these other guys too, they're going to try to, I'm sure, probably to trade Drouin first and foremost, even if they had to retain 50% salary, so they had a cap hit of, say, $2.75 to $3 million next year, that would be better than 5.5, get them some relief, because they are tight up against it for a team that's, starting to rebuild here. And, at the same time, they would have no cap hit the following year if they don't go down this road, right? So ultimately, they have some options. You either trade with retained salary, team takes him off her hands, might need a sweetener given the fact that he hasn't been super healthy or productive the last couple of years. But his cap hit would go from 5.5 down to 1.83, and then an additional year at 1.83. So they'd save over $3.5 million next year. And except for a team that's tight up against it, that's starting a rebuild, they definitely need to be able to shed some money. But I'm not sure how much of a hurry they are to get Drouin off the books. But to me, like I said, they have options there. I just don't see him back in Montreal next year. Now, we also have another player in Philadelphia, James Van Riemsdyk. I don't see him being in Philly next year, whether it be trade, buyout, or whatever happens. But he's got 1 year left at $7 million. To me, he can still be productive, but he needs to be on a better contract to make any team, see him as being more valuable. He can still probably give you 15 to 20 goals, plotting himself in front of the net, tipping pucks, getting our net front presence on the power play. Like, he's still useful. It's just tough paying him $7 million. So they would save $2.6 million next year, so it's not a ton of money. They still have a hit of 4.3 and then an extra year of 1.33. So I think that one's a little bit less likely, just given the savings there. That's still $2.6 million in savings is $2.6 million in savings. Don't get me wrong, but if they could find a trade for him and retain salary to knock the hit down to a similar amount that they would do on a buyout, then obviously, that would be better for them, right? So if they retain, 50%, they'd only have a cap hit of 3.5. That's better than 4.3. So to me, I think a trade would be the first and foremost option. They'd only go down this road if they absolutely can't find it. But ultimately, I don't see why a team wouldn't take JVR for 1 year at 3.5 to get you 15 to 20 goals. I think that can be worked out. So I do think a trade's more likely in this scenario, but like I said, a buyout could be an option if that doesn't materialize. They would get the St. Louis Blues, and defenseman Marco Scandella is up next. He's got 2 years left at $3.275. Scandella, to me, is a player who probably doesn't have a long future in St. Louis. They need, again, like most teams, to find a way to gain a little bit of cap flexibility. Just like most teams here, they're up against it pretty tightly. They would save $2.7 million next year, so that's a big chunk of his income, what he's getting on the cap hit. And, of course, they'd have an extra year of negative dead space the following season, but at the same time, they need all the savings they can get here in the short term, and I'm not sure that he really is going to have a role there. I mean, obviously, they do have Nick Leddy, who's on the expiring contract. I think they'd like to consider bringing him back, but just no way to make it fit. But they also need room to sign some forwards like David Perron as well. So I think somebody needs to go, and Scandella, to me, in St. Louis is the most likely candidate. Now, you've also got Jake Gardner in Carolina, who has reportedly been considered healthy and all good by the doctors, according to Carolina Hurricanes GM Don Waddell. So they have to make a decision on Gardner. He's barely played, though, in 2 years. And when he did play, the first year of the contract, he was probably one of the worst seasons of his career. I'm not really sure that Gardner fits in Carolina. $4 million income. I think they can do much better than that. They would save almost $3 million. They'd save $2.9 million next year by doing a buyout. But, of course, they'd have an extra year at 1.4. But, again, they need the space now, so I don't know how they want to go about this. But if they could find a trade for Gardner and trade him at 50% retained, they'd only have a hit of $2 million and then no second-year hit, right? That's always the better way to go if you can do it. It's just, I'm not sure if a team is going to want to take on Jake Gardner for $2 million. Would the Arizona Coyotes do it? Maybe. You might have to throw a little something extra in there to get them to do that, but it is something they could consider. So, like I said, some of these players might find themselves traded with salary retained if they can find those deals, but they don't have a lot of other options here as fallback in case trades can't be materialized. And another one I think is maybe a little bit less likely, but something that they should look at is Ottawa Senators center/winger Colin White. He's got 3 years left at $4.75. Now, like Phil Myers, I mentioned earlier in the video, he's in the RFA category, so it's a lot cheaper to do this buyout. Now, Colin White's an extremely popular teammate, well regarded within the team organization, but he's battled so many injuries, and at this point he is healthy, but hasn't really lived up to the contract. He got a 6-year deal a few years back and has really struggled through the first part of it. Ultimately, they could save a ton of cash here. Like I said, 3 years at $4.75, they would save $3.8 million in each of the next 2 years, followed by $625,000 in year 3. Now, of course, they'd have 3 years of dead space of $875, which really isn't that bad. That would only begin in years 4, 5, and 6. So by then, the cap is up, and right now, at least, the Sens are not in a bad cap situation. They don't really need the space that badly, but if they wait too long here, it's just, it's something they can get out from underneath sooner than later. But at the same time, trading White, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I would say that it's going to be challenging given where he's produced and been able to stay healthy the last few years. I would think it's going to be challenging. There was some rumors about Colin White to Montreal at one point. I don't think that was overly close to happening, but we'll see what happens. But to me, the Sens have a bright young core there, lots of money that's going to some of their young stars, but they have guys like Josh Norris that needs to be signed this summer. Tim Stützle's coming up next year. Sanderson will be up next year. They're going to be obviously, moving way up in the cap over the next couple of years, and this contract to me is really one of the few bad ones on the books. Obviously, a guy like Nikita Zaitsev, I think, needs to be moved along as well, but I think with the way that contract is structured and the time on it, I think a trade there would be more likely with salary retained, whereas White, I think a buyout would be more reasonable given the fact they can do it much cheaper where he's still an RFA status. So let me know your thoughts on these buyout candidates, and if there's anybody else in the league that you feel is a good candidate as well, make sure you mention them down in the comments so we can discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.